The Making of Donald Trump. How did you get inspired to do this book?
Well, I've known Trump since 1988. And when he announced this time that he was running, because he's been talking about it since 1985, I recognized he was serious. And what troubled me was that my peers on the national journalism level were not asking the right questions. I mean, Trump is terrific television. It's like not just when you rubberneck to look at a car wreck, it's like a car wreck with fireworks and dancing girls and performing seals. And people just can't turn away from it. So journalists weren't asking the questions they needed to ask about, well, who is he? Does his self-image that he's selling you comport with reality? And what are his actual philosophies and positions? Mm-hmm. So I wrote about 24 pieces about this, and no publisher wanted to do a book in 2015 because nobody believed he would get the nomination, although I said right from the get-go I thought he might. And by the time he got it, nobody could do it except someone like this publisher, Melville House, which specializes in doing books at high speed. And so we got the book out August 2nd.
With regard to Trump, what do you want to impart to people about him? You talked about what I would call a map between what he says, what he might say we want, right, and what he is.
Well, Donald is a master salesman. Anybody who's done any kind of sales should admire his unbelievable ability at sales. But he's also P.T. Barnum. You know, hey, buy a ticket and see the incredible Fiji mermaid and the two-headed man. And so it's important to understand that he is selling you what he thinks he can sell you, what he wants you to buy. And in the presidential race, what he's selling you is his belief that he's superior to the rest of us. Of course he should be president of the United States. As one of his sons has said, they believe that they're genetically superior to the rest of us. And so would be beyond question that he should be president. The problem is, well, who is he and what's he actually done? Well, there's no evidence that he's a billionaire, none. He's somebody who was always borrowing money from his father, borrowing money from banks. He's boasted, I borrowed money knowing I wouldn't have to pay it back, not paying his bills. You don't have to be a billionaire to own a 30-year-old jet and a smaller jet and a couple of helicopters. You got a lot of income, but you don't have to be a billionaire. And I wanted people to understand that Donald Trump, throughout his adult life, has gone out of his way to do business with criminals. His father's business partner was an associate of the Gambino and Genovese crime families, according to the New York State Organized Crime Task Force and a lot of other law enforcement reports. Donald, when he arrived in Manhattan as a young man, made a beeline to the notorious Roy Cohn, and through him got connected up with all sorts of mafia figures who Cohn represented. But he went beyond that. He did business with Russian mobsters just as recently as a couple of years ago. He has done business with con artists and swindlers. And perhaps most importantly of all, the person who supplied his casinos with helicopters wasn't somebody at one of the many reasonably well-run and well-capitalized helicopter companies. It was a mob associate, a convicted felon. And it turned out that this guy had a second business. He was a major cocaine trafficker. Shipments of cocaine and marijuana up to 1,500 pounds at a time that he personally handled. And when he was indicted, Donald should have run away from him. The New Jersey Casino Control Act says that the owner of a casino is required to prove by clear and convincing evidence that he or she doesn't associate with criminals. Instead, Trump drew this guy closer. And while the case was from Miami to Cincinnati, that's where the drugs went, he asked the case be moved when he agreed to plead guilty to either Miami or New York City where he lived. And somehow, mysteriously, because neither the defense or prosecutor can explain this, the case was transferred to New Jersey, where it came before a relatively newly appointed judge, Marianne Trump Berry, Donald's sister. Now, she removed herself from the case, but she also had to go tell the chief judge that she was flying around in the helicopters of a major drug trafficker. I mean, think about that for a minute. We have a sitting federal judge flying around in the helicopters, as was her husband, of a major drug trafficker. Trump then wrote a letter pleading for mercy for this guy. He then lied about it, denied he did it, until he was confronted with it again. And he called the man a credit to the community and a stand-up guy who was a diligent citizen. Well, the mules who drove the drugs got 20 years, up to 20 years. This guy served 18 months, and he said he was eligible for parole because he had a job with Donald Trump, and he said he had no money to pay back his fines and debts to the government, but he moved into his girlfriend's newly acquired multi-million-dollar Trump Tower apartment. Now, boy, that's something journalists should be asking about on national TV. Voters should be asking about, and I have been invited to talk about this on national networks in Australia, Japan, Canada, Britain, France, and Germany, because the book is selling all around the world, including a German language edition. Sure. But I have not been on ABC, NBC, CBS, or Fox, and PBS edited out every reference to Donald's connections with these criminals, every reference. You haven't read about it hardly in the New York Times, where I used to work, a little bit in the Washington Post, and I've helped both those papers with their stories by giving them documents that I have. But the public doesn't know who Donald Trump really is. What they know is the image he's been selling them.
It almost sounds like an episode of The Sopranos.
Well, there's some elements of that in there for sure, yes.
And you look at this man, you have, I guess if you're like a social scientist, you have to start with, there is an attraction here.
Yes, absolutely.
There is an attraction. It's not uniform across the population, and obviously he does things that drive some people away and attract others, but he did get the nomination. He went through the biggest, what you might call, moneyed party in the country and blew right through all of the structures that were designed to inhibit someone like this from winning.
Well, and on one level, Rob, this reflects the weakness of political parties in America, and they're becoming almost irrelevant. But on another level, Trump understands something that, as you know, I've spent the last 20 plus years of my life writing about, which is inequality, how government is creating it through policies, the tax system that favors people at the top. And Trump grasps that 90% of Americans are not doing well. And he knows how to sell them what they want to hear. And he's telling people, elect me, and I will get you out of your economic misery. I know why we're having trouble. And he doesn't talk about these complex things that are in the real world of government rules you've never heard of. He talks about easy to understand things. It's the Mexicans. It's the Chinese. It's the Muslims. It's the other. And to a lot of people, that's a simple, easy to understand explanation that he can sell. And so that's a good and important part of his base, is selling this simplistic answer. Here's the trouble with that. Donald Trump has no plan or policy to do anything for ordinary people. In fact, he started off at the beginning of his campaign saying wages are too high. He said it in November in one of the presidential debates, wages are too high. He was asked about it the next day. He said wages are too high. The next day after that, however, he appeared on Fox News, and he said, I wasn't saying wages were too high, I was saying minimum wage was too high, because he'd been asked on the Wednesday morning event about what about the minimum wage, people living on it. There's no question that Donald Trump has said repeatedly, wages in America are too high. So people who think Donald Trump in the White House will relieve me of this economic terror I've been living in, where we don't have unemployment insurance now for lots and lots of people who lose their jobs. We've restricted their eligibility at the state level. People don't have savings. Wages haven't grown. The median wage in this country, half make more, half make less, has been stuck from 1998 through 2014 at about the same level, $28,000 when you adjust for inflation. He has no plan to deal with any of that.
Yes, but I want to take the other side slightly.
Okay.
Slightly. I agree with you that he has no prescription, but the attraction comes from a diagnosis, and it's in one phrase, and everything else is a variation on that. The system is rigged.
Yes. And he's right about that. I mean, that's the subtitle of one of my previous bestsellers. The system is rigged, and he's right. And you know what? Donald Trump's one of the people who rigged it.
Yes,
And he brags
thief
about
to catch
that.
a thief is the old saying. Here is a guy who is trying to inspire us to believe, because he's played on the inside,
Right.
he can now be the ref and stop the inside players from pulling more wool over our eyes. Except maybe he won't, and he's pulling wool over our eyes himself.
Well, and I think it's very clear he's pulling the wool over our eyes for a couple of reasons. Trump has a very, very short attention span. And I know that from having talked to him, had lunch with him, interviewed him many times. Incredibly short attention span. He literally doesn't know anything. He was asked in one of the presidential debates by Hugh Hewitt, the very smart conservative talk show host, what's your priority for the nuclear triad? He gave an answer that was gibberish. Hewitt followed up. He gave another answer that was gibberish. Then Marco Rubio was asked the question, and Rubio explained it's the ability to deliver nuclear weapons from submarine missiles, land missiles, or jet bombers. Yeah. Well, I point out in the making of Donald Trump that Hugh Hewitt asked him this question 4 months earlier on the radio. Trump had 4 months to learn about it. When I met Hewitt recently, by chance, I brought this up, and Hewitt said, isn't that amazing? He had 4 months, he didn't do anything to learn about it, because he doesn't know anything. Think about how he describes the job of the president. Does he talk in terms of what the Constitution says? Are the duties, powers, and limits? No, he talks like a dictator. He's going to tell Ford and Nabisco where they can build factories. He's going to order you to do this. He's going to do that. That's not within the purview of the president. And then finally, on top of all of that, no legislation, and he can't do anything without legislation that he says he's going to do, will move through Congress unless one person allows it, and that's the Speaker of the House. Mm-hmm. So who did Donald Trump pick repeated fights with? Paul Ryan, the Speaker. Who did he appoint to run his campaign? Steve Bannon, who is the chairman of Breitbart, a website that regularly attacks Paul Ryan and that has said, and in fact has an article that says Paul Ryan is a secret double agent for Hillary Clinton. Now that tells you he doesn't understand how government works. He has no idea how it works. Therefore, I conclude he can't actually accomplish any of the things he said.
I think that you're right in one sense, that he may have demonized the government by picking Paul Ryan.
Yes.
But the demonization of the government may be part of what gets him elected.
Oh, yes.
And then he'll have trouble implementing because of the way he scarred and antagonized the Speaker of the
Yes.
House, who is that vital element.
No, I think Trump has been brilliant in making the government to be the bad guy here. And we have had this enormous disconnect between Washington and the rest of the country for going on and building for about 35 years. One of my grown children, who's a Republican, likes to say, you have to recognize that in America, the Republican Party and Republicans are two separate and unrelated things. And at the base of all that is the campaign finance system. And, you know, Trump says repeatedly, I give them money and they do what I tell them I want to do because they want more money. That's the underlying real problem he's exploiting as someone who created it, benefited from it. But I don't see any evidence he's got the capacity and the skill level and the diligence to fix it.
To repair it systemically.
Yes. Most people are interested in the issues about their own lives. You know, Gandhi said the politics of India are bread, salt, and water. Mm-hmm. And the politics in America are people want a roof over their head, a car that starts in the morning, and an ability to feed and clothe their kids. Most of them don't want to do and aren't willing to do what it takes to have some huge amount of money that they don't need in the first place. They want a pension that's going to be there when they actually retire. And there's another interesting aspect to this, Rob. One of the things Trump teaches in his books and his lectures is never trust any workers, especially the high-level workers around you. They're always out to get you. You must never trust them because any chance they get, they're going to go get you. Or I think he's projecting about himself in this regard. Whereas business and capitalism are based on trust. You and I make an agreement. I'm going to buy your house in 30 days, and I expect in 30 days that you're going to be there and you're going to perform, and you expect me to show up with a check.
The house is in good shape as represented and what have you.
And the Democrats need to, I think, recognize that they are supposed to be the party of people, not of business. Yeah. And they need to represent the interests of people who are never going to have significant amounts of capital, but we want to encourage them to save and have so they're not living paycheck to paycheck, but higher wages. And by the way, remember, Donald Trump, wages are too high in America. It's one of his principal themes. Wages are too high.